Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Federal party leaders hit the campaign trail again, with Tory leader Aaron O'Toole discussing how his party would stand up for federal workers. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation says Ottawa needs to get its spending under control, citing taxes have more than doubled since 1961. And we hear how the underground church in Afghanistan is being helped by Christian media as the Taliban goes door to door looking for Christians.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The federal party leaders staked out positions on key issues today, with the Liberals and NDP playing to traditional strengths, and Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole appealed to workers impacted by the pandemic. O'Toole says a Tory government would require federally regulated employers with more than 1,000 employees or $100 million in annual revenue to include worker representation on their boards of directors.
We will put Canadian workers at the front of the recovery with a plan that works for them, their families, and their communities in every sector and in every region of the country. Canada's recovery plan will give workers a real voice. Our plan will ensure they can support the long-term success of their employer and industry, and ultimately, their own financial security. With Canada's recovery plan, they meet as equals, able to advance their interests through mutually beneficial relationships.
O'Toole also said if elected, his party would offer Canadians a GST-free month in December. Now, according to political reporter Brian Lilly, it would help support more local businesses leading up to the Christmas holiday.
If retail is struggling, if we're trying to get people back into brick and mortar stores as opposed to shopping online from Amazon, well, this is one way to go about it. By the way, doesn't look like this policy would apply to Amazon. So you would have to go to a local store and actually buy something. That is, the type of thing that it's encouraging the economy without putting extra money on the government. Sure, the government wouldn't get tax revenue out of that, but the stores would actually be able to survive. They'd be able to pay their employees. Those employees would pay taxes and so on. That's the benefit.
Mr. Lilly will also discuss how close the Tories and Liberals are in the polls. That interview is coming up after Business News. In Halifax, Liberal Party leader Justin Trudeau portrayed his party as the guardian of universal health care, with a promise to hire 7,500 new family doctors over 4 years.
This is our moment to rebuild a healthcare system that works for all Canadians and that our kids can be proud to inherit. We've been sitting down with provinces on healthcare since day one of being in government. Over the past 17 months specifically, we've worked extremely closely with the provinces. And we hear them, that the federal government needs to step up with more funding to make sure people are getting better care right across this country.
The NDP's Jagmeet Singh told supporters in Montreal that his party would end the flow of federal dollars to fossil fuel enterprises in order to fight climate change.
So we've got a choice in this election. You can choose Justin Trudeau, who's been increasing fossil fuel subsidies, or you can choose New Democrats, who will end once and for all fossil fuel subsidies, who will invest in a renewable future, invest in renewable energy. We've also laid out our plan to invest $500 million in Indigenous-led conservation for land and forests. We can fight this climate crisis. What we've seen at the federal level is not a lack of resources or financement. It's been a lack of commitment, a lack of will. New Democrats have the will to get this done.
A recent report by the Fraser Institute says 36% of a Canadian family's budget now goes to taxes. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation also says taxes in Canada, including gas, have more than doubled since 1961, even after accounting for inflation. To discuss this in more detail is the federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Franco Terrazzano. Franco, where can the governing party cut? Should we maybe start with politicians' salaries?
Absolutely. I mean, what we need to see is we need to see these politicians being willing to save some money. And the best place to start is to actually see some leadership at the top. Now, what really lands like a slap in the face for taxpayers is that our members of parliament have pocketed not one, but two pay raises during COVID-19. And you know what? Not only do we have to talk about the taxes today, but we also have to talk about the taxes tomorrow. And each Canadian's share of the federal government's debt is already more than $29,000. And that bill is only going to go up if these politicians don't stop borrowing all that money.
Now, Franco, you say the taxes in Canada have more than doubled since 1961, but correct me if I'm wrong, we didn't have Medicare, employment insurance, and the Canada Pension Plan back then. Money is needed to support those programs, no?
I think what that underscores is just the importance of actually having governments operate services efficiently, right? Because what we have to remember at the end of the day is that there is no such thing as a free lunch. And the second thing that we have to remember is that throwing more tax dollars at a problem isn't going to solve the problem. I mean, just look at the Alberta government. It is one of the biggest per person spenders on healthcare, but Albertans aren't getting the best results when it comes to healthcare. So Hal, when we hear these big spending promises from politicians, we do have to ask them a very serious question, and that's how are you going to pay for it?
Thanks so much, Franco. That was Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joining me from Ottawa. A two-term Lethbridge City Councillor is jumping into provincial politics. Rob Miyashiro announced he's seeking the Alberta NDP's nomination for Lethbridge East and competition for the UCP's Nathan Neudorf. Miyashiro has been the Executive Director of the Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization since 2013. He says it was clear to him that Rachel Notley has the best vision and the best approach to governing.
In 2015, when they were elected, we all took a step back and said, hey, what are they going to be like? We're not sure. We've never known any other government. I was very impressed by the climate change plan. I was very impressed by the way that they wanted to work with all sectors, especially to diversify our economy. I also was impressed by the way that they were looking at a way to diversify away from oil and gas, however, still support our oil and gas industry to be as best as it could. Those are nuances, I think, that governments that lead with a sledgehammer are not apt to do in the same way.
The provincial election is expected to be called between March and May of 2023. Miyashiro adds he decided to announce his candidacy to give him time to meet with the community and hear people's concerns. More affordable housing options are coming to Taber. The town recently broke ground on a new project called The Meadows. Over 300 mobile homes will be located on a 33-hectare parcel of land. Taber Mayor Andrew Prokop says the $5.9 million project was necessary to fill a gap in their requirement for affordable housing.
We identified a gap that there was a very limited low cost or affordable housing in the town of Taber. So there was a study done soon after, and it confirmed that same message. And since then, this particular 60 acres you see behind us is now the start of a 302 residential location for that purpose, to deal with low-cost housing and affordable housing requirements.
Homes in the Meadows will be in the $200,000 to $240,000 price range. Streets Alive Mission here in Lethbridge is hosting its annual Wing Ding coming up on Tuesday. The fundraiser is a family-friendly event that will entail a full chicken wing meal, carnival games, and activities. Information booths discussing services Streets Alive offers will also be set up. Director of Fund Development with the mission, Jennifer Lepko, says the fundraiser isn't necessarily about a one-time dollar figure goal, but rather getting people to sign up for monthly donations.
The needs are every day, all year long. They don't just happen one time a year. And so we really appreciate the monthly giving. Even $5 a month can buy a number of pair of underwear for people who need them. It can buy snacks, it can buy coffee, it can help just support the work that we're doing here. And so that's really important to us. So this one's not about how much dollars we raise, it's more about how much engagement and if we can get those monthly givers. So we kind of have a monthly giving challenge, and we're hoping that 60 people sign up. Like I said, $5 a month makes a huge difference in a person's life.
Tickets are $20 per person or $45 for a family and can be purchased online or by calling Streets Alive at 403-329-1159. When I worked the 1988 Winter Olympics in Calgary, the hundreds of volunteers who worked the Games helped to make it a huge success. Volunteering has helped so many communities over the years, including right here in our city. Volunteer Lethbridge pre-screens candidates for a number of organizations in our city, creating a win-win scenario for everyone involved. The group's executive director, Amanda Jansen, explains.
It just makes it so much easier for the volunteer to move more freely within the community, and reducing a strain on the Lethbridge Police Service with criminal record checks, etc. So it's just a win-win for everybody.
Amanda Jansen will also discuss how the recent pandemic impacted volunteerism. She'll have details in an interview with Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our newscast. The Lethbridge Bulls are champions of the Western Canadian Baseball League. The team beat the Edmonton Prospects 16-5 to sweep the three-game series 2-0. It's the first championship for the Lethbridge Bulls since the 2015 season. Congrats going out to the Bulls, WCBL champions once again. The Edmonton Oil Kings are among the teams mourning the loss of a player in a weekend crash that killed 3 teenagers in Surrey, British Columbia. The team confirmed that 16-year-old Caleb Reimer was one of the victims, noting he was one of several young breakout players on the team's roster during their 2021 Central Division Championship season. The other players who died in the Saturday single-vehicle crash include Ronan Sharma and Parker Magnuson. The NHL tweeted condolences to the families of the 3 junior hockey players who tragically died in the single-vehicle crash. Calgary Sports and Entertainment says all fans, event staff, and employees attending Stampeders, Flames, or Hitmen contests must be fully vaccinated in order to attend games this season. The organization is following in the footsteps of the Winnipeg Jets, Toronto Maple Leafs, Toronto Blue Jays, and Raptors, which said they would be implementing new COVID-19 vaccination policies. Meanwhile, in BC, Premier John Horgan says his province will require proof of vaccination to attend certain social and recreational events starting September 13th. By October 24th, officials said entry will require people to be fully vaccinated at least 7 days after receiving both doses. It is official. The Alberta government has renamed a mountain peak near Canmore to its traditional Stoney Nakoda name. The original nickname from the 1920s had the word squaw in it, which many consider to be quite offensive. The new name is Bald Eagle Peak. Indigenous Relations Minister Rick Wilson says it's another important step towards reconciliation, saying it helps to celebrate Indigenous culture and traditional names that reflect the true meaning and history of the land. An Indigenous ceremony was already held with the Stoney Nakoda at Canmore's Visitor Centre last September, honoring the upcoming name change. Beginning Tuesday, folks in Cardston and area can call 811 or go online to book an appointment for a COVID-19 test. AHS officials say COVID-19 immunizations will also be available at walk-in clinics scheduled for 2 days this week. The swabbing and shots will be available at the Cardston Provincial Building. Masks will be required at all AHS sites and will be provided at the door. Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister says he is leaving the future of education reform and other bills currently before the legislature to his successor. Pallister already announced earlier this month that he will not seek re-election. And education bills still to be voted on would eliminate elected English language school boards across the province. U.S. President Joe Biden defended his administration's decision to pull troops out of Afghanistan. Biden told reporters at the White House that history will record that the drawdown was the logical and right decision to make.
We've evacuated an extraordinary number of people, as I will detail in a minute, about 11,000 individuals. That number will change day to day as the air and ground operations in Kabul vary. Let me be clear. The evacuation of thousands of people from Kabul is going to be hard and painful, no matter when it started, when we began. It would have been true if we had started a month ago or a month from now. There is no way to evacuate this many people without pain and loss of heartbreaking images you see on television.
White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says the U.S. is in talks on a daily basis with the Taliban, even as deadly violence blocked many evacuees from entering the Kabul airport.
In the last 24 hours alone, 28 U.S. military flights evacuated approximately 10,400 people from Kabul. In addition, 61 coalition aircraft have evacuated approximately 5,900 additional people. That is more than 16,000 people in 24 hours, and the flights are continuing hour by hour as we speak. We have established a network of transit centers in multiple countries in the Gulf and Europe, where we are getting U.S. citizens on flights home, and we are running biometric and biographic background checks on Afghan evacuees before bringing them to the United States or having them relocated to a third country.
Underground churches in Afghanistan are fearing for their lives as the Taliban is going door to door looking for fellow believers who have the Bible on their phones. As we hear in this next report, Sat7's Persian language TV station is providing special broadcasts to help believers. They're also running emergency on-screen texts calling on Persian speakers to pray.
A media ministry helping persecuted Christians in Afghanistan says the Taliban is executing believers who refuse to renounce their faith. Sat7's Christian television and media network is responding to the Taliban takeover with special programming on Sat7 Pars, its Persian language channel. Their director is Panayotis Keenan.
We are doing our best to address this situation. I mean, the Taliban are promising that life will continue as normal, but we all know that that will not happen. We have Christians in Afghanistan who came to Christ because of Sat7 Pars, who are who are contacting us because they are fearing that they will be eliminated, because they are receiving death threats, because the Taliban know who are the Christians, and we continue to have people 24/7 responding to any kind of requests that these people have.
And Sat7 Pars will soon be broadcasting an exclusive program to encourage their viewers in this troubled region called In Pursuit of Hope. Peter Wooding for the Global News Alliance.
Opposing rallies that drew hundreds of people in Portland, Oregon sparked clashes on Sunday. The two groups had gathered in different parts of the city. Demonstrators lit fireworks and witnesses said gunshots were even heard. Portland police say a man was arrested over the shooting, but did not have an update as to any injuries. Officials say the Proud Boys group discharged rounds from airsoft guns while anti-fascists threw the fireworks, and chaos continued in the core of downtown Portland. More than 13,500 firefighters are working to contain a dozen large blazes that have destroyed hundreds of homes and forced thousands of people to flee in California.
We have more than 13,000 personnel from state, local, and federal agencies fighting these statewide fires. This includes over 1,000 engines, 257 hand crews, 337 bulldozers, 344 water tenders, 87 helicopters.
For 7 days out, we're looking at conditions in the south part of the state that are low to moderate as far as risk for new, large, damaging fires. That is very good news for us. Very, very good news. In the north part of the state, we're looking at moderate conditions, again, for new, large fires.
Environment Canada issued a severe thunderstorm watch for our region today. How long will the potential rain be sticking around? Full weather details are coming up. The severe thunderstorm that hit Calgary recently over the weekend and brought hail has made its way here to southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Rocher is back with all of the weather details. Jeanette, hopefully we won't see the hail that Calgary received.
Yeah, well, Hal, this evening we're actually looking at conditions that are capable of producing some severe thunderstorm watches. That could also mean the development of strong winds and large hail, as well as a 60% chance of showers. So we definitely need to be aware of that this evening. As we look into tomorrow, Tuesday, the skies are going to clear up for us, giving us some sunshine. 17 degrees the high for tomorrow. Into Wednesday, a high of 23, up to 24 on Thursday. Back down to 21 on Friday and Saturday, and then rounding out our 7-day forecast with a lovely 25-degree day on a Sunday with a mix of sun and cloud. Now, the average high for this time of year is 25. We're not going to see that this week until around Sunday, so we are seeing a little bit lower than that. Average low for this time of year, 9 degrees. 37 was our high temperature back in 1996, and in 1992 we had our lowest temperature on record, which was only 1 degree. That's very cold for August. 6:36 is when the sun rose this morning, and our sunset this evening, 8:33 p.m., giving us right around 14 hours of daylight. Quite a difference than the 16 some odd hours that we were looking at only just a few short weeks ago. It happens really fast, doesn't it? As we look to the west coast, we're seeing sunshine tomorrow in Victoria and Vancouver, 23 degrees in both of those cities. Of course, feeling a little bit cooler by the water. Lots of rainfall overnight in Edmonton, but should be clearing up tomorrow morning. 19 degrees the high, 16 the high in Calgary. Same thing, should be clearing by tomorrow morning in Calgary there. Chance of showers tomorrow in Saskatoon with a 20 kilometer per hour wind. 16 the high there. 16, same thing for Regina with a mix of sun and cloud. Showers beginning in the morning in Winnipeg. 19 degrees the high there. So looking a little bit cooler than the average norms for this time of year. Not the case though in the central part of the country where we're in a heat wave. 31 degrees the high. Look at all of this. Look at all that sunshine. Also the humidex looking at 36, 38, and 39 for the humidex in those cities. So heat warning plus humid. It's going to be a hot one. Much different story on the East Coast here. 27 the high in Fredericton, but lots of rainfall. Rainfall also Halifax looking at a tropical cyclone statement with tropical depression Henry making its way toward the Maritimes tomorrow. Should be looking at post-tropical conditions by Tuesday. Lots of rainfall though there as well. Some rainfall also in Charlottetown, 29 degrees the high and 24 in St. John's with a 60% chance of showers and 40 kilometer per hour winds. So there you have it. That is your forecast. A little bit of everything.
The U.S. has given full approval to the COVID-19 vaccine made by Pfizer. The Food and Drug Administration's decision may help lift public confidence in vaccinations as many in North America battle the contagious Delta variant. The FDA says it has never before had so much evidence to judge a shot's safety. More than 200 million doses have already been administered in the U.S. since emergency use began last December. Pfizer is purchasing Ontario-based cancer drug developer Trillium Therapeutics. It's a deal valued at $2.26 billion U.S. Pfizer says it will pay $18.50 per share in cash for the Ontario-based biotechnology company. That is more than double the stock's 60-day weighted average price. Trillium has no products in the market, but its potential treatments include biologics that aim to prime a patient's immune system to detect and destroy cancer cells. It is in early stages of testing with a focus on blood, bone marrow, and lymph node cancers like lymphoma and leukemia. Stats Canada says households racked up a record amount of mortgage debt in the first year of the pandemic, but also paid down other debt at a record pace. The federal agency says mortgage debt rose by a record $99.6 billion from the start of the pandemic to January. That left households carrying around $2.5 trillion in outstanding debt. Non-mortgage debt fell by $20.6 billion over the same period. That includes a $16.6 billion drop in credit card debt. Stats Canada says the outstanding debt on credit cards has risen on average of 20.7% a year over the past 20 years. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 138 points to 20,477. The Dow was up 215 to 35,336. The S&P 500 was up 37 points to 4,480. And the Nasdaq was up close to 278 points to 14,943. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 350 to 65.64 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 9 cents to 3.95 US. Gold was down 24 cents to 18.05 US an ounce. Silver was up a penny to 23.63 US an ounce. Wheat is at $415 per metric ton. Barley, $412. Canola, $878. And corn is at $435 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 218 to 126.45. Feeder cattle were down 83 cents to 158.20. Lean hogs were down $1.15 to 87.48. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to finish at 79.05 US.
Recapping one of our top stories this hour, two-time Lethbridge City Councillor Rob Miyashiro says he's seeking the NDP nomination for Lethbridge East to go up against UCP incumbent Nathan Neudorf. Miyashiro believes that NDP leader Rachel Notley is the best choice for our province moving forward. The next Alberta election is slated for 2023. The talk of mandatory vaccinations for federal workers has become quite the hot-button election issue so far. Political reporter Brian Lilly will have more details coming up next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Whoop Up Days are back, taking place September 2nd to the 5th at Exhibition Park. Enjoy live entertainment, Wild Rose shows midway, food trucks, and Whoop Up Days Marketplace. Admission and on-site parking is free. For details and gate times, visit exhibitionpark.ca. Come out and support a worthy cause. The Flex Air Parkinson Step and Stride is taking place Saturday, September 11th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Henderson Lake Park. This is the Parkinson Association of Alberta's largest fundraiser of the year, and your fundraising efforts contribute to the emotional, social, educational, and active support provided by this organization. This is a COVID-safe event, keeping social distancing practices with spacing and staggered starts. Register today by going online to parkinsonassociation.ca/stepinstride. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
The federal election is coming up on September the 20th, and it appears as though mandatory vaccinations are the wedge issue of the campaign so far, with Justin Trudeau trying to make it something to rile up voters. To discuss this in more detail is political reporter and one of our regular contributors, Brian Lilly, joining me once again from Toronto. Brian, will this actually work?
It might work, Hal, because polling shows that mandatory vaccinations for certain types of workers are incredibly popular. There was a poll put out last week by Maru Public Opinion, which showed that, I'll go with one example, for nurses across the country, 70% said nurses need to be fully vaccinated or fired. And it was a strong majority in every province in the country. Even in Alberta, where it was a bit lower, it was still a strong majority said nurses need to be fully vaccinated or fire them. It was the same for police officers, paramedics, teachers. And at a certain point, you say, okay, what are we trying to accomplish here? We've got about 82% of people across the country with their first dose. You've got coming close to 75% with their second dose. These numbers keep growing every day. Are you trying to convince people who are hesitant about the vaccine or punish people who you don't like because you think they're not doing the right thing? Justin Trudeau has said he will make it mandatory for federal workers to have the vaccine, except here's the rub. There was a letter put out by the Chief Human Resources Officer, a woman named Christine Donahue, last week, and it said that people who refuse to get vaccinated will have to undergo other processes like screening or regular testing. That is exactly the position of Aaron O'Toole. Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives say, look, we encourage you to get your vaccine, but if you don't want to, you're going to have to be tested. You might have to undergo screening or other measures just to keep the workplace safe. Justin Trudeau says that's not good enough, and he's campaigning against Aaron O'Toole. But his position, the actual government position, is the same. By the way, that letter, after I reported on it in the Toronto Sun, was ripped off the government website. Trudeau says it was taken down by bureaucrats, no political interference, because it had incorrect information. No, it was taken down because it embarrassed the Liberal Party. No letter from the Chief Human Resources Officer goes to every manager and employee of the federal government without being fully vetted at the highest levels of government. So they've changed their position to match the polling and try and make this a wedge issue. It's a ridiculous wedge issue, but the Liberals want this to be the entire issue that we decide the 2021 federal election on.
Brian, Liberal leader Justin Trudeau raised the issue of abortion once again, normally a sign that the Liberals are worried about losing voters to the NDP. But this time you say he did it in a strange setting. Where did he bring it up?
He was standing in a family's backyard in Markham, Ontario, one of these, events where the party, and they all do it, by the way, they find a family that supports them and they go and they pose with the parents and the kids, and he's making a daycare announcement. He's talking about childcare, $10 a day childcare, which is the plan he wants to take across the country. He's got 8 out of the 13 provinces and territories signed on to some sort of plan with federal funding already. But he's in Markham, Ontario, with a family talking about childcare when he starts saying, but remember, if you don't vote Liberal, the Conservatives are going to take away a woman's right to choose. Linking childcare and abortion is absolutely bizarre in my books. I don't care how in favor of abortion you are or how pro-choice you are. That is a bizarre combination, Hal. It's the Liberals essentially saying, women, vote for us no matter what. You want childcare? You want an abortion? We've got you either way. Just vote for us. We know that without women backing the Liberals, they do not win. When the plurality of women vote Conservative, the Liberals are out of power, and they're worried about that right now. That whole ploy shows that they are looking to shore up voters who might go off to the NDP. They're absolutely worried at this point.
Aaron O'Toole's Conservatives are betting big on the economy, Brian, and making life more affordable for families. Now, they already released their full platform, and it includes a GST holiday. Can you explain how that would work?
They're talking about saying no GST. They've picked the month of December. Great for Christmas shopping, right? Especially last minute shoppers like me, although I'd have to get it done before the end of the month. So maybe not that great for me. A GST holiday in the month of December. Now, it wouldn't be on really big ticket items like brand new cars, but could be on a big screen TV. It would be on kids' toys. It would be on all kinds of issues. And they say it'll do two things. It will help families with their budgets at a time when a lot of families are still struggling, but also help retailers who are struggling. I got to say, it's not a bad policy. I've heard some critiques, but it tends to be from people who just don't like the Conservatives anyway. But as far as a policy goes, if retail is struggling, if we're trying to get people back into brick and mortar stores as opposed to shopping online from Amazon, well, this is one way to go about it, by the way. Doesn't look like this policy would apply to Amazon. So you would have to go to a local store and actually buy something. That is, the type of thing that it's encouraging the economy without putting extra money on the government. Sure, the government wouldn't get tax revenue out of that, but the stores would actually be able to survive. They'd be able to pay their employees. Those employees would pay taxes and so on. That's the benefit.
And those employees who go out and do their Christmas shopping. Now, Brian, the Tories are also making big promises on jobs, 1 million new jobs, and part of that is a wage subsidy?
They're talking about a wage subsidy of up to 50% of a salary within limits for up to 6 months for new hires. So it has to be new hires. And they would pick a point when the emergency wage subsidy would end. And whatever your employment roles were like at that point, well, if you started adding on employees, let's say, Hal, you added 5 new producers to your show. Well, you could get a wage subsidy for that. This is the type of thing that is, yeah, it's a government subsidy. That will annoy fiscal conservatives, no doubt. My colleague Lauren Gunter at the Edmonton Sun, none too happy with positions like this, but it is the government saying, hire new people, will help you out. As we're coming out of a pandemic, probably not a horrible idea. I can think of worse. The fact that we've still got CERB going on or its replacement, the CRB, I'm talking to small businesses who cannot hire people unless they're willing to pay cash right now. Why? Because people are being paid to stay home. And many of them are saying, I'll stay home and work cash jobs so that I'm getting the government money and this other revenue. And I'm talking to restaurant owners, bar managers, barbers who say they can't compete with this and they can't pay people under the table. So it puts them in a bad position.
Brian, as for the NDP, so far their big plan and their platform, beyond saying that they would fire workers who are not vaccinated, is to tax the rich. You know what I find really interesting about that comment from Leader Jagmeet Singh is that each time he makes that comment, he's wearing a $1,000 suit.
He's wearing suits that I could never afford. The man has a fold-up, expensive bicycle that goes in the back of his BMW Roadster. Jagmeet Singh is the premier example of the champagne socialist. Look, I've known and worked with NDPers over the years, and Hal, you work in politics, you get to know and be friends with people in all parties because we're all people at the end of the day. We have different political views, but Jagmeet Singh is far more of a champagne socialist than any NDP leader I've ever covered. And that, it just rings hollow when he says we've got to tax the rich because that's him. Of course, he doesn't consider himself rich. And so he, wants these extra luxury taxes and wealth taxes on families above a certain amount. Now, I will say this, it doesn't hurt the NDP when they start talking about corporations that abuse public money during the pandemic. And he keeps raising the issue of companies which took the wage subsidy and took all kinds of other government handouts and then turned around and gave, multi-million dollar bonuses to their executives, to their CEOs, and paid dividends. There were, unfortunately, companies that did that. Thankfully, I don't work for one, so I'm able to critique it without, having my CEO be worried. But there were companies that did that. That annoys a lot of people, regardless of political affiliation. And Jagmeet Singh's able to use that to say we need to tax them. He wants to actually go back and do a retroactive tax on these people now.
Now, the crisis in Afghanistan has become a serious election issue that no one really expected, Brian. Why did Justin Trudeau hesitate on denouncing the Taliban and saying Canada would not recognize them as the legitimate government? I mean, Mark Garneau did the same thing, saying, oh, we're kind of taking a wait-and-see approach when it comes to the Taliban in power, a terrorist organization.
It took actually, it took 3 days for the prime minister to arrive at this point. Our allies, be it the Americans and Democratic President Joe Biden, he's supposedly kindred spirit with Trudeau, or Boris Johnson. Yeah, he's a conservative, but he's a British conservative, so sometimes not all that far off of where the liberals are. He said he wouldn't recognize the Taliban. Biden said they wouldn't recognize the Taliban. Trudeau was asked about it and waffled, wouldn't answer, and said, well, we expect them to let people leave. His foreign affairs minister, Mark Garneau, said, we'll take a wait and see approach. And then on Tuesday, after being lambasted for this for a couple of days, Trudeau's asked again and says, we won't recognize them. And then said to the reporter, and as you pointed out, they are a terrorist organization. That should have been his first thing. Instead, he had to be asked about Afghanistan several times before bringing this up. He talked about it on Tuesday when he opened his statement. Before he even got to his daily announcement, he talked about Afghanistan. He discussed how he had called Hillary Clinton the night before, the former Secretary of State in the United States, former presidential candidate, the woman behind Benghazi, I might add, and talked to her about the situation in Afghanistan. He wanted to promote that, but didn't say anything about the fact that he would not recognize the Taliban. He had to be pushed on it. I can't explain why, other than he doesn't like calling out oppressive regimes, be it China, Cuba, Afghanistan, or anywhere else.
Brian, the polls seem pretty tight right now since the start of the election, and one of the polls even puts the Conservatives in the lead. Many say, we shouldn't really put a lot of stock into these polls. Where do you stand on it?
Well, when I hear complaints about polls, Hal, it's often about Hillary Clinton and the fact that in the 2016 US presidential election, people said, well, she's got a 95% chance of winning and Donald Trump has 5% chance. And of course, Donald Trump won. To those people, I would say those were people misinterpreting the polls, because I can go and find you the radio broadcast that I did the night before where I talked to pollsters and said, I think Trump's going to win, and here's why. And it was just a different reading of the polls. Polls are a snapshot in time. Polls give you a response to the questions put forward. I'm not really sure I buy the idea that the Conservatives are ahead nationally or even neck and neck with the Liberals in the greater Toronto area, which is what a Forum Research poll puts out. But they have tightened. And the idea that this is a cakewalk for the Liberals isn't borne out, not by any of the polls, except for some that, in my view, are outliers. I don't think there's a 10 to 12 or 13-point gap between the two main parties. Is Aaron O'Toole within striking distance? Yes, but he has a ground to make up. And if people want to replace Justin Trudeau, then they've got to get behind someone like Aaron O'Toole, because Maverick Party's not going to win. They're only running a few candidates in Western Canada. Maxime Bernier's PPC is not going to win. They simply don't have the infrastructure, the money, or the ability to carry out the type of campaign that will win. And they got, 2% of the vote, if that, last time. So Aaron O'Toole is the only alternative to beat Justin Trudeau at this point. Even Jagmeet Singh and the NDP are not going to rise up that much, in my view. Aaron O'Toole's made it closer than a lot of people thought. We'll see how it goes over the next little while. As I always like to point out, Justin Trudeau started out the 2015 campaign in third place, wasn't going to win. Jack Layton was in fourth place in 2011, became official opposition leader. And Stephen Harper in 2006 was an also ran who was never going to win, became PM for 9 years.
So, Brian, bottom line, what will it take for Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives to finally beat Justin Trudeau and the Liberals?
Well, they have to put something in front of voters, and they did this week. They released their full election platform on the first full day of campaigning. And why is that important? Because of advanced voting. We're going to hear a lot, and hopefully you and I can talk over the coming weeks as I look into the details more about how mail-in ballots will work. I hear a lot of concern about that. Advanced polling started on Monday, though. This past Monday, you could find your local election returning office and do a write-in vote for the candidate of your choice. And you can vote between now and election day. So they were smart. They put out their full platform early. A lot of voters are going to be concerned about congregating in large settings. My polling stations generally aren't crowded at all, but some people will be concerned and they will take advantage of early voting. So they had to do that. They also had to boil it down to a few key points, and they've been able to do that. They've got 5 points, including mental health action, the million jobs promise, things like that stick in people's minds. When you can boil it down, it works. Stephen Harper in 2006 boiled it down to 5 points, including lowering the GST, lowering healthcare waiting times. Short, snappy things that people can remember sticks in their mind. So if he can do that and show that he's a serious government in waiting to Justin Trudeau, then he has the chance to be the government in waiting and replace Trudeau. Now, for that to happen, Trudeau has to falter. In my view, Trudeau has been faltering so far out of the gates. He's not handling this mandatory vaccine thing well. In fact, in my view, he's lying to the public. And the Afghanistan issue is dogging him in ways that I don't think they really thought about. This campaign has not gone the way the Liberals mapped it out before they called the election.
Should be a very interesting election campaign. Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
When there's work to be done and not enough budget to hire workers, what do? Well, we hope to get some volunteers, naturally. Volunteers make a world of difference to so many people in different situations. Joining us to discuss this further is Amanda Jensen, Executive Director of Volunteer Lethbridge. Welcome to the show, Amanda. So great to have you on with us today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. So first of all, can you maybe tell us a little bit about Volunteer Lethbridge?
Absolutely. Volunteer Lethbridge, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. So we've been in the community for quite some time, and we do some things that you would naturally expect me to say. So it's our mandate, it's our vision and mission to connect volunteers to volunteer opportunities in the community, which really strengthens the fabric of a community when you have that involvement and engagement. And like you said, it also supports the nonprofit organizations who rely on volunteers to accomplish their missions. But we also do some things that maybe aren't so well known. So another thing that another part of our mission is to support nonprofit organizations in achieving their mission, and we call that, capacity building. So we offer training, we offer supports around volunteerism, but also around other aspects of nonprofit management, so that we can engage and support and help grow our nonprofit organizations within our community. And we're also quite involved with advocacy work in our community, but also provincially and nationally. We are connected to Volunteer Alberta, to Volunteer Canada, and Imagine Canada, so that we can make sure that the voice of Southern Alberta is heard at the tables where it needs to be heard.
Wow. Well, you guys obviously are doing a lot. What types of groups and organizations are typically coming to you because they need those volunteers? Of course, you mentioned the nonprofits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Volunteer Lethbridge has, we have about 160 nonprofit member organizations with us. And so that's who we're supporting. And so those nonprofit organizations, really run the gamut between grassroots, no employees, totally board driven, potentially a smaller budget, up to, organizations that run, millions of dollars in operating budgets and, have a full staff. So there's quite a diversity in the nonprofit organizations that we serve. But, they come to us for, just the opportunities to volunteer are just so varied. So board members would be one definite place where we're constantly helping organizations recruit so that they can be strong and govern wisely. But then you think of volunteers like in the soup kitchen or in the food bank. They're doing coolie cleanup. They may be doing some office work. So there's just so many ways that volunteers can interact with our community.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned board members, because that's not something I wouldn't have thought of, that you would be recruiting people through Volunteer Lethbridge. So that's really interesting. Now, of course, like we all know that volunteering has some great benefits, health benefits, even like mentally, emotionally, physically. We know that it does good for you, but I would imagine you and I were talking a little bit before, like off camera, about the pandemic and how that really affected volunteerism. Do you want to get into that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yes, what we were talking about, the older adult population specifically, really hit hard by the pandemic, as we know, in so many ways. But when we're talking about volunteerism, seniors are the largest cohort of volunteers that we have in our community and in most communities. And when you're accustomed to being engaged and involved and contributing, and then to have to step back from that is, I believe, what we're hearing, are really challenging for a number of seniors who would normally, like I say, be engaged and involved. So it was sort of a double whammy for some of our community members. We were also talking about loneliness and isolation, and how, I mean, truly, that's an ongoing problem. It's been a problem for, I wouldn't even guess how long, but it's not a new problem, but certainly was made worse by the pandemic. And so one thing that Volunteer Lethbridge did to try to alleviate some of those feelings of loneliness and isolation is to start the Keep in Touch program, whereby it's a volunteer calling program, as you might well imagine, and volunteers would call their match or their friend, or however you want to refer to it, once or twice a week, and really for a phone call, and for that touch with the outside world, and just have a nice conversation. But what we also found is that the loneliness and isolation was so deep for some, that they really needed connections to outside sources, whether it be food security or housing security, or mental health issues, etc. So we have become a bit of a referral source for some of those participants in our programs. So what it also did was allowed those seniors who were accustomed to volunteering to volunteer in a safe way from their own home, and still be able to have that connection to service and the benefits of volunteering. So yeah, the feedback that we've had from the seniors themselves, for some it's a nice to have. It brightens their day. The feedback is 100% positive, but there are some of those special stories that always touch your heart, about how it's really changed their lives, and they feel a sense of hope, and they have something to look forward to. I know one senior recently told us that her week doesn't start until she talks to that volunteer. So whether that's Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever day it is, like that's when she feels like her week begins. And so sometimes we just don't realize what an impact volunteerism makes.
Absolutely, completely. Now as we're sort of somewhat coming out of the pandemic, are you noticing that more people are coming out to want to volunteer? Did you see less people coming out during the pandemic? Were organizations not needing them as much, or were they needing them even more because some of their workers were gone?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And that was the assumption that we all had to make so many assumptions at the beginning of the pandemic, because we'd never experienced something like that before. And it was my assumption that the organizations were having to let staff go, and that they would need more volunteers. And what we found actually was the opposite, because in many cases, the volunteer budget, if an organization was fortunate enough to have a volunteer manager, somebody dedicated to that work, or simply just any resources they would put towards a volunteerism program, were the first to either be cut or to be reallocated somewhere else more pressing in the organization. And so the capacity of nonprofit organizations to manage volunteers really plummeted. And I'm speaking sort of nationally, like that's what we're hearing from research that has been done on a national level. But certainly, I think we felt that here in Lethbridge as well. So volunteerism, the opportunities really plummeted, and of course, the fear of that interaction that people had during the pandemic and may still be feeling certainly kept people from reaching out to serve. And so now, as you say, as we're starting to come out of it, we are seeing a great uptick in the number of volunteer opportunities available, and certainly more people returning to some semblance of normal life. And for many people, normal life involves volunteerism, thank goodness.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Amanda, I noticed on your website, it makes mention of how volunteering can be a helpful thing for new immigrants to Canada as well. This is something maybe we don't think about, but it makes sense.
The research proves it out that it's a fantastic way for new Canadians to learn about their new community. Potentially, if they're learning English, it's a great non-threatening or less threatening way to learn the language and feel comfortable to meet new people. So, but when we talk about volunteerism, like you say, sometimes we spoke a little bit about board service, that we're really trying to, that's an area that Volunteer Lethbridge is looking to move into, is encouraging more new Canadians to be board members. Board leadership, board service is a great leadership training opportunity, and will often lead to other leadership opportunities and ways to connect with community. So, for instance, if you have a local council person, for instance, they likely had learning opportunities that may have involved board service before taking on, that somewhat larger leadership role. And so, the more diverse and inclusive that we can make our nonprofit boards, we're building leadership capacity in our community, which is really powerful. So you'll see some new programming over the next 6 months, even to encourage new Canadians to become involved, but also then to work with nonprofit organizations to be inclusive and to know what it means to be inclusive and equitable. And many of us think of ourselves in that way, but we may not know how to, put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, when, we might not know what our biases are, or just how to welcome new people into our fold. So, yeah.
Amanda, can you maybe explain how someone considering volunteering could maybe get started? What's the process?
Well, connect with Volunteer Lethbridge. So that's hit our website, volunteerlethbridge.com. You could also give us a call if speaking to somebody is more preferable. But if you just want to get an idea of what volunteer opportunities there are, checking out the website is a great place to start. Then you can start picturing yourself in some of those roles, and narrowing down what you might want to do. And when it's time to get serious, when somebody is ready to actually begin, there's a volunteer application form on our website, and that just puts the volunteers into our system so that we can communicate effectively about new opportunities that might be coming up, if that is desired, and just keep in touch. So I would say that's a really good way a good place to start. But we also have people on staff that, if volunteering is a new idea and it feels a little bit, overwhelming, or you're not sure, we have just such warm-hearted, smart, lovely people in our office that are just willing to have a conversation as well.
Thanks so much for being with us today, Amanda. Great to have you on.
Oh, my pleasure. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Amanda Jensen is the Executive Director of Volunteer Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.